From Doha, coming up in the next 60 minutes. In what could be their final stand, Ukrainian forces in the besieged city of Mariupol are defying Russian demands to surrender. Ukraine's allies have pledged to send more weapons to help it defend against a renewed offensive in the eastern Donbass region. A search is on for hundreds of Rohingya refugees who've broken out of a detention facility in Malaysia. And a migrant crisis on the US southern border. Leaders from across Central America gather in Panama to address the problem.
I'm Gemma Nash with Sport. Wimbledon bans Russian and Belarusian players from this year's tournament. The All England club makes a stand over the invasion of Ukraine.
It is 1500 hours GMT. We'll start in Ukraine, where a Russian-imposed ultimatum for troops in the besieged port city of Mariupol to surrender has come and gone. Moscow had demanded that Ukrainian forces inside the Azovstal steel plant give up their arms, but they're still refusing to leave.
This is our appeal to the world. This could be our last appeal of our lives. We are maybe facing our last days, if not hours. The enemy is outnumbering us 10 to 1. They have advantage in the air, in artillery, in their forces on land, in equipment and in tanks. We are only defending one object, the Azovstal plant, where in addition to military personnel, there are also civilians who have fallen victim to this war. We appeal and plead to all world leaders to help us.
Russia's defense ministry says that it hit more than 1,000 targets across the country overnight as part of its renewed operation in eastern Ukraine. But the Ukrainian military says that its troops are fighting back.
Over the past 24 hours in the territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, 10 attacks by Russian invaders were repelled, 12 tanks, 28 armored vehicles, 2 vehicles and 1 artillery system were destroyed.
And Western powers are sending new shipments of heavy weaponry to help Ukraine defend the east. Our correspondent Charles Stratford has managed to get close to what's being called the line of contact. That's where both sides are exchanging fire. Here's his report from Kostiantynivka in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region.
Certainly around this area has seen some of the heaviest fighting in the last 48 hours or so. That was up until this morning, certainly around here. We've heard sporadic shelling in this area. We've been to a village, basically the closest village you can get to the front line. The Ukrainian military advising heavily on us not going any further. We've met a woman in that village. I suppose you could really describe it more of a hamlet, 4 or 5 houses. A shell had landed very close to her home, basically much of the home destroyed. We asked her why she hasn't joined the hundreds of thousands of other people that have left this area, and it's often the same response that you get from people still here, which is literally, I have nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, we understand that there has been shelling in various different places along the front line. We can hear stuff going on both to our east and west, the rumbling of what sound like possibly airstrikes, possibly heavy artillery. We cannot confirm either side whether it's incoming or outgoing. And interestingly, there is this sense of a renewed confidence, if you like, in the Ukrainian military, amongst the Ukrainian officials, who are saying that there has been what they describe as an offensive to try, or at least success in repelling Russia's moves, the Russian forces' moves on a number of different areas.
Let's go live to Moscow. Al Jazeera's Dorsa Jabari is there for us. Dorsa, within the past few minutes, Russia has said that it's test-launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. What more are you hearing about that?
Yes, we heard from the Russian Defense Ministry, who said that they've successfully tested a new long-range intercontinental ballistic missile called the Sarmat. And according to the country's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, this test was carried out at 15:12 Russia time in the country's northern area near Finland, and the test was successful. Now, this is the latest in a new series of ballistic missiles that will be replacing the previous ones that is in Russia's missile weapons. And the Russian President Vladimir Putin has since congratulated the defense minister, and he has said that this Sarmat intercontinental intercontinental ballistic missile will reliably ensure the security of Russia from current threats. Vladimir Putin also said that it will make those who are trying to threaten Russia to think. Certainly a significant development here as the situation in Ukraine is currently escalating, and the Russian president clearly very satisfied with the results that was delivered from the country's defense ministry. Now, this intercontinental ballistic missile is apparently has a range of up to 18,000 kilometers, and it will be replacing the previous one that was one of the heaviest missiles in the world. It is now going to be the largest nuclear capable ballistic missile that Russia will have in its fleet, in an arsenal. According to the defense ministry, this Sarmat missile will be part of an ongoing series of tests, and then once those tests are completed, the missile will be replacing what they already have in their arsenal. This is one of the heaviest, if not the heaviest, ballistic missile in the world that will be joining Russia's current stockpile.
Also, as we reported a few moments ago, Western powers are sending...
Really counterproductive, and the Western countries that are supplying them are just trying to prolong the conflict that is ongoing. The Russian defense minister has said on Tuesday that the weapons that are coming into Ukraine by the Western countries are those with the aim of trying to extend the conflict, and they will continue to do so until the very last Ukrainian soldier. And Vladimir Putin's words clearly speak to how the Russians feel.
All right, also many thanks indeed. Al Jazeera's Dorsa Jabari reporting live there from Moscow, from the Russian capital to the US capital. Let's speak to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, who's in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, tell us more about US plans to provide further military assistance to Ukraine.
Well, State Department officials confirming that the United States is weighing another package of arms assistance to Ukraine. This is in addition to the $800 million that was already supplied in recent weeks. The U.S. president has been closely coordinating with allies, including a video conference call that took place some 24 hours ago. We assume that this was something that was discussed, given the fact that the previous package was also done in coordination with partners and allies. We also know that the U.S. president is going to be discussing this matter with his defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, as well as his chair of the Joint Chiefs, when he has a meeting at 20 GMT, as well as a dinner with both of those officials. And then prior to that, we know that the defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, will be meeting with the Polish defense minister. So plenty of opportunity to discuss exactly what is needed, what will be given. But we do know that there have been questions in recent days by reporters about the concern that Ukraine is running dangerously low on ammunition. And this has provoked the need for a discussion here in the West, as well as in other parts of Europe, that there is this need for re-upping of supplies, if you will. So in recent days, the White House, as well as the White House press secretary and the Pentagon spokesperson, saying that this is something that is being considered. We are expecting an announcement imminently. What will this package look like? The details have not been revealed, but given the fact that the previous package included small arms as well as ammunition, but also helicopters, Humvees, naval drone vessels, we expect that it will be something similar. What we do know is that the U.S. considers this to be vital assistance for Ukraine to defend its sovereignty.
Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett reporting live there from Washington. Kimberly, many thanks indeed. Germany's foreign minister says that Berlin will ramp up aid for Ukraine as soon as possible and will provide training.
Other partners are now supplying armoured vehicles. I would like to say here and clearly, this is not taboo for us either, even if it sometimes sounds like it in the German debate. We have already agreed to such deliveries, but we don't have anything available at short notice that we can now deliver really quickly and immediately.
Live now to Berlin, Al Jazeera's Step Vassen is there for us. Step, what more has the German government said, particularly about providing weapons to Ukraine?
Well, particularly about sending heavy weapons, and that's exactly what the Ukrainian government has asked for. But the German government, the foreign minister said it, but also Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said it yesterday, is not sending heavy weapons now because the government says the military doesn't have these weapons now. Germany has been sending lighter and defensive weapons to Ukraine, but these heavy weapons they simply don't have. Basically, there is this fear behind it that Germany doesn't want to be drawn into a war directly with Russia. What Germany is offering, though, is financial assistance. Apparently, there's a list of weapons that Germany has shown to Ukraine in which Ukraine can pick. But the Ukrainian ambassador to Berlin has said that the weapons, the heavy weapons that they really desperately need, are not on this list. They have specifically asked for tanks. The second-hand Leopard 1 tanks have been mentioned, and Marder armored vehicles. Basically, they are available at the company. The company has said they can prepare them in the next couple of weeks and send them to Ukraine, but also the government can send tanks now from the military and they will be replaced by this company. But so far, the government has said we're not going to send this, which has led to strong criticism, not only from the Ukrainian ambassador here, but also from coalition partners, from Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor. The Greens and the Liberals have actually complained that Germany, as this very important country in the EU, should do more to help Ukraine, and that Germany is basically isolating itself within Europe by this different stance.
Al Jazeera's Step Vassen reporting live there from Berlin. Step, many thanks indeed. The UN says that more than 5 million people have fled Ukraine. They're mainly women and children because men have been ordered to stay behind and fight. More than half of the refugees have ended up in neighbouring Poland, where the government has given them access to healthcare and education. The fighting has led to Europe's biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War.
We cry. We all have the feeling that we've no home. We've no idea where to go, what to do, where to run. It's very scary. We wanted to go immediately because all the houses around were destroyed. We sat in the cellars, afraid to go out. Everything was plundered. People wanted to eat. We also had no water.
Banu Bandnaga is a press officer with the World Health Organization. He joins us now live from Lviv. Good to have you with us, Banu. What is the WHO doing there in Ukraine? What are its main concerns?
So our issue at the moment is not one of supplies, it's actually one of access. We've moved about 218 metric tons of medical and healthcare supplies into the country. That's 218,000 kilograms, roughly 2/3 of which has actually reached, the destinations that it's meant to help people, which is mostly in the east and the north of the country. Our concerns are manifold. We're witnessing one of the biggest humanitarian catastrophes in Europe in several generations. We're worried about infectious diseases. COVID-19 vaccination rates have come down. Routine immunization rates are down. People aren't getting treatment for chronic conditions like cancer and tuberculosis and HIV. It's worth noting that Ukraine had a sort of higher than average numbers of TB and HIV even before the war. But it's also worth saying that before the war, Ukraine was the poster child for healthcare reform and was really making great strides in addressing access to medicines and treatments. And that looks like it's all set to be derailed by this war.
Okay, so you're getting the medicines that are required at the moment into the country. Of course, it's another thing administering them because so much of the health infrastructure has been destroyed.
Yes, a lot of the infrastructure has been destroyed, and reports today of a potential corridor out of Mariupol are promising if they happen. WHO is very eager to get into some of those places where, unfortunately, we're seeing a bit of a information blackout. We genuinely have no idea what the health system is like in some of these places, but we do know from some sources that we're speaking to that in some places, like in Luhansk Oblast, for example, we believe that all health facilities, or nearly all health facilities, are either damaged or destroyed. So you can just imagine what it's like there, where people can't even get treatment for, say, conflict-related injuries, if they've got shrapnel wounds, and that's not to say that the chronic conditions or the kind of day-to-day medicines they might need will also not be there. WHO is also running mass casualty trainings, which are really important in these sorts of situations where, we've got thousands of doctors attending these trainings to learn how to deal with things like traumatic limb injuries and sort of burns care, and a range of other conflict-related injuries.
Okay, Banu, really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us from the World Health Organization. That's Banu Bhatnagar there. Here with the news now from Al Jazeera. Still to come on the programme, we'll find out why city officials in India's capital are tearing down shops and properties. The search for hundreds of Rohingya refugees who escaped from an immigration detention centre in Malaysia. And in sport, Liverpool outclassed Manchester United to go top of the English Premier League. Gemma has all the action. In New Delhi, city officials used bulldozers to raze shops, stalls and properties that they say are illegal. Their actions continued despite India's top court ordering a halt to the eviction drive. It happened in the Jahangirpuri neighbourhood, where most of the residents are Muslim. 4 days ago, there were violent confrontations in the area between largely Hindu and Muslim crowds during a religious procession.
It's a conspiracy against Muslims, so Muslims don't live in this area. But why can't Muslims stay here? Are Muslims terrorists?
This was my shop. They were rioting there and did other things, but it's us, the shop owners, who are getting crushed.
For so many years, nothing happened. For so many years, did the government or anyone else not know if there could be fighting between Hindu and Muslims? Did they only realize it after stones were thrown during the religious procession? They were just troubling the common man.
More now from Al Jazeera's Elizabeth Puranam in New Delhi.
The demolitions in the neighbourhood of Jahangirpuri in northwest Delhi have now stopped, but it took the North Delhi Municipal Corporation, which was carrying them out, more than 2 hours after the Supreme Court asked them to stop bulldozing structures to do so. Now, the bulldozers were sent in at 10 o'clock in the morning. They were accompanied by hundreds of police and paramilitary forces, and they worked for 3 hours, destroying many dozens of properties, mostly shops and mostly belonging to Hindus, mostly belonging to Muslims rather, but some belonging to Hindus as well. They also destroyed the gate to the Jahangirpuri Mosque. Now, the North Delhi Municipal Corporation is run by the Hindu Nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, and it says that what happened on Wednesday was part of their regular, what they call encroachment drive to remove illegal structures, but it did take place just 4 days after the violence between Hindus and Muslims in this predominantly Muslim neighbourhood, and just 2 days after the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP's Delhi chief, asked the North Delhi mayor to destroy any illegally constructed structures belonging to people that were arrested in connection to Saturday's violence. Now, 24 people have been arrested so far. Most of them have been Muslim. And our team spoke to people in Jahangirpuri who said that they feel that Muslims are being disproportionately targeted. And both Hindu and Muslim shop owners whose structures were destroyed said that they had nothing to do with Saturday's violence.
Javed Ansari is a journalist in New Delhi. He says the demolitions are being used as a political tool by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party.
Local body elections are scheduled for later in the year in New Delhi. The BJP in 2 successive assembly elections in Delhi has been routed, and they are trying to use this as a means to try and get back to power. The bulldozer has now become a sort of an election mascot for the Bharatiya Janata Party. It is being viewed as a means to try and polarize. Last Wednesday, clashes took place between the members of the two communities. Tension has been simmering there, and now they've used this as an excuse to try and get rid of encroachments. If that indeed was the case, then half of Delhi is full of encroachments and illegal structures. South Delhi, one of the poshest colonies in South Delhi, Sainik Farms, that's where the rich and famous of Delhi stay. That's wholly illegal. Why not begin from there? Why begin where the poorest people stay, and most of them happen to be from a particular community, the Muslims.
Sri Lankans are again protesting in a city near Colombo, where a demonstrator was shot dead. Officers in Rambukana opened fire at a protest on Tuesday, killing one person and injuring 20 others. Police put the city under curfew, but the protesters are defying the ban. There have been widespread anti-government demonstrations as Sri Lanka faces soaring fuel and food prices. Al Jazeera's Manel Fernandez reports from Colombo.
As you can see here around me, even yesterday's violent clashes, which police, where one person died, has not dampened the enthusiasm of these protesters. They say it will only serve to make them more determined in their struggle to send Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, and Mahinda Rajapaksa, prime minister, and their government home. All of these people here come from different backgrounds. There are families, there are young people, there are members of the clergy, there are business people, there are lawyers. We just saw a procession of lawyers, and everybody adding to this sort of call for the government to step down. We had professionals all uniting under one banner to ask the president to go home. And in the parliament today, there was pitched battles between the government and the opposition, who traded blame about the death of that protester. But at the end of the day, what people say is that corruption needs to be stopped, that the money that's being stolen is the money of the poor people. And they say until such time that there is a change of the system, this protest and this campaign is going to continue.
East Timor has elected José Ramos Horta as its new leader. The Nobel laureate got more than 62% of the vote, defeating incumbent Francisco Guterres. It's the second time that Ramos Horta will lead East Timor. He was president from 2007 until 2012. More than 500 Rohingya refugees have escaped from a temporary detention centre in northern Malaysia. Police say that more than 360 of those who got out have been apprehended. Florence Louis has more now from Kuala Lumpur.
Hundreds of detainees on the run. Nearly 530 people escaped after a riot at a detention centre for undocumented migrants in Malaysia's Kedah state. Police say the detainees broke down doors and grills and fled. 23 immigration officers on duty were overwhelmed. At least 6 people, including 2 children, were killed while attempting to cross a highway. More than 360 have been rearrested, and an operation is underway to recapture those still at large. The cause of the riot is still not known.
We have set up a team to investigate this thoroughly. We take statements from all those involved to determine the cause of the riot.
Several rights groups have long criticised conditions inside Malaysia's immigration detention centres, citing overcrowding and poor hygiene. A Rohingya activist who was a refugee in Malaysia told Al Jazeera,
"The people will never choose to take such a risky journey unless the situation in the detention centre is dire. To my knowledge, I'm aware that it is often very difficult to have adequate and appropriate access to food or medication or other basic needs."
Police say those who escaped are Rohingya. Malaysia is a popular destination for the mainly Muslim Rohingya, seeking to escape persecution in Myanmar or a life confined to refugee camps in Bangladesh. They pay human smugglers and risk their lives on dangerous sea voyages for the chance of a future somewhere else. Yet, those who arrive here aren't necessarily better off. Malaysia does not recognize refugee status, so they can't work legally, and their children have no right to education. Malaysia hosts more than 100,000 Rohingya who are registered with the UN Refugee Agency. But there are thousands more who remain undocumented after arriving here illegally. Florence Louis, Al Jazeera, Kuala Lumpur.
We'll get a weather update next here on the News Hour. Then, a former Hong Kong radio host and activist has been sentenced to 40 months in jail. We'll tell you why. And Israeli troops fire rubber bullets inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. We'll have the latest on rising tension at the occupied holy site. Then in sport, defeat for the top seeds in the NBA playoffs. Gemma here, with all the action in around 20 minutes.
Hello, we've got a north-south split in the weather across the Middle East at the moment. To the north, we've got some cloud pushing through, not too much rain on that. Having said that, bits and pieces of showery rain easing over towards Iran across the Caspian Sea. Further east, still a few showers there for Kabul. A little cooler than it has been recently. Western disturbance, which will just knock the edge off the temperatures for northern Pakistan, northwestern parts of India. Further south, generally dry, hot and sunny. 35, 36 Celsius here in Doha over the next couple of days. Those temperatures just starting to ramp up now. Now we're seeing temperatures falling away across northwestern parts of Africa. Some cooler, wetter weather coming in here. Little disturbance in the western side of the Mediterranean, drawing up some Sahara dust as we go on through Thursday. Very strong winds coming through here. Other side of the Sahara, some heavy showers for southern parts of Nigeria. Thundery downpours coming through here. Benin, Togo seeing some lively showers, seeing some very wet weather too, easing over towards Liberia. Joins up with the showers right across the tropical belt. We'll see some heavier downpours coming back into Zambia, Zimbabwe over the next day or so. Some wetter weather also making its way across Madagascar, but largely dry now for South Africa.
When COVID-19 first hit, the need to minimize contact drove many of the world's judicial systems online. Now, in the name of cost and efficiency, some of them want to stay there. But what if holding trials in cyberspace denies defendants the right to a fair hearing and removes safeguards against abuse? People in Power investigates. Online justice on Al Jazeera.
Adrian Finnegan here in Doha with the news now from Al Jazeera. The headlines: for the third time, a Russian deadline for Ukrainian soldiers to surrender in the besieged port city of Mariupol has passed. The last of Kiev's fighters are holed up in a vast steel plant and say they won't lay down their arms. Western powers are sending new shipments of heavy weaponry to help Ukraine defend the east. Artillery systems and helicopters are part of the latest package being sent by the US. And Russia says it's successfully tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile called the Sarmat. President Vladimir Putin says that it will provide food for thought for those who threaten Russia. Well, while the fighting is concentrated on the eastern and southern front lines, the full toll of the war in other regions of Ukraine is still unknown. Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdulhamid is in Borodyanka, a town near Kiev that's been reduced to rubble.
Well, the situation is just as you can see behind me. I mean, it's actually difficult to describe the amount of destruction that you see in this village. Borodyanka is not bigger than a village. These are private homes. Actually, earlier, the owner of this home, an old lady called Valentina, was here trying to salvage anything she could from the wreckage, and I asked her, what did you get out of it? And she just showed me a few pillows that she had put in the car. Now, she told me she spent the whole war, so until the 29th of March, in the basement of her house, and when she came out, this is what she found. Her whole life reduced absolutely to rubble. And then if you have a little walk around here now, there has been some work to clear out all this area, piles and piles of rubble. But look at this apartment building. It's quite impressive to see. You can see just one block of the apartment not there anymore. Everything charred. I don't think anyone can come and live here. Maybe those buildings will have to be torn down and brought up again. Now, driving here, it was about a 2-hour drive from Kiev. What you do see is pockets of exactly that same scene. Civilian targets, houses, lives of people completely destroyed, and there's no way they could come back and live in this village, at least for the foreseeable future. And as I said, you see that in village after village, all the way from here to Kiev, just to give you an idea of what happened here. And when you look at this, you can imagine what's going to happen in the Donbass. You can imagine what's unfolding at the moment in Mariupol, where the fight is even much more virulent than what has happened here.
Well, as Ukrainian forces defend the east from an all-out Russian assault, the US has begun to ship additional weapons. The White House is expected to announce a new military aid package soon, in addition to an $800 million pledge it made last week. The UK and Canada have also promised extra artillery and other support for Ukraine, while fellow NATO member Norway says that it's sent 100 Mistral air defense missiles. And Japan is sending masks and special clothing to protect against chemical attack after a request from the Ukrainian government. Earlier, we spoke to Harry Nedelcu, Policy Director at the consultancy Rasmussen Global. He explained how there's been a shift in Western aid from defensive to heavy weaponry.
The conflict is now moving to the southern and the eastern part of Ukraine, flat land, which requires, again, heavy weaponry, howitzers, tanks, and this is what this package is tailored to do. It is a good first step. In quantity, of course, it will have to be augmented, and this is what the second package tries to do. But right now, Kiev needs all the help we can get, not only symbolic, but also meaningful help on the ground. But do remember, the Russian offensive that is about to and has already started is also marked by the losses that Russia has incurred in the first stage of the war. So Russia too does not have the manpower it had at the beginning of this war.
How long does it take to make a practical difference, though, on the ground when, as you say, this offensive on the east is already taking place as we speak?
You know, it does require some training. It does require not only, handing over the keys to the tanks or the armored vehicles, but also the maintenance that comes along with it. Having said that, though, it's not learning something new. Artillery pieces, you just learn the specific items that you need to learn for a specific artillery piece. However, in essence, you don't have to relearn how to use it. So there is some training involved, but it's not impossible.
The International Monetary Fund says that the war in Ukraine is driving a global economic downturn. It's slashed its growth forecast from 6.1% to 3.6% this year. Al Jazeera's Shahab Ratansi reports from Washington.
The IMF's projections for the world economy have worsened significantly since its last report in January, when it predicted a post-pandemic recovery. The reason is clear.
Global economic prospects have been severely set back, largely because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This crisis unfolds as the global economy has not yet fully recovered from the pandemic.
From an estimated 6.1% in 2021, the IMF now says economic growth will shrink to 3.6% in 2022 and 2023. The fund says that inflation, already surging due to the pandemic, will be amplified due to war-related supply shortages. And its World Economic Outlook says increases in food and fuel prices could lead to social unrest. However, the IMF also said inflation for advanced economies may fall to 2.5% next year. Some economists say that should mean a change in course to prevent a devastating global recession.
Threatening to do what it's done many times before, which is to increase interest rates unnecessarily. And that affects the whole world because interest rates of other central banks tend to follow the Fed in the world. And that makes it more difficult for developing countries to avoid crises, economic crises that push millions of people into poverty.
But such is the uncertainty about the war in Ukraine, further energy sanctions on Russia, future deadly COVID variants, and more supply bottlenecks in China, the IMF says its latest predictions may be too optimistic. To coincide with the IMF spring meetings, Oxfam has released a study predicting that the pandemic and the war in Ukraine could push more than 263 million people into extreme poverty in 2022. The charity is calling on the IMF to stop increasing hardship due to its insistence on conditioning loans to the developing world on implementing austerity policies, while it warns rich nations to avoid cutting spending to preserve what economic recovery there is.
The managing director had said that the suffocating of force of austerity should not be in Europe. But we don't see the same in developing countries and in poorer countries.
Oxfam says there's a disconnect between the IMF's research, which discusses increased social unrest and more hunger because of the pandemic and the war, and the IMF's actual policy prescriptions for the most needy nations, which demand the slashing of the social safety net, ending subsidies on cooking gas, increasing taxes on food, and freezing public sector pay. Shia Britansi, Al Jazeera, Washington.
A court in Hong Kong has sentenced a pro-democracy activist and former radio host to 40 months in jail. Tam Tak Chi was convicted of sedition last month. He was a prominent face in the mass protests that swept through Hong Kong in recent years. Tam has been in custody for more than a year and a half since his arrest in September 2020. More now from Al Jazeera's Britt Clennett in Hong Kong.
In handing down the sentence, Judge Stanley Chan said that Tam Tak Chi showed very little remorse and sincerity during the court proceedings. Tam was a very outspoken figure. He ran a very popular talk show, and there's some concern about what this sentencing might mean for media freedom, press freedom in Hong Kong, which is meant to be guaranteed in the city's mini-constitution, the Basic Law, when Hong Kong was handed back to Chinese rule from British rule. There's also some concern about what the new leadership might bring into Hong Kong. From July, there will be a new leader taking over from Chief Executive Carrie Lam, and that's expected to be the one-horse race, which is John Lee, the former security chief. John Lee led the response to the 2019 protests, and he's expected to take a more hardline approach to leadership. So there is a renewed sense of unease and apprehension about what this new era of leadership in Hong Kong might mean. Britt Clennett, Al Jazeera, Hong Kong.
Tom Grundy is the editor-in-chief at the Hong Kong Free Press. He outlined what the activist Tam Tak Chi has been accused of.
This was the first post-handover sedition trial specifically over speech. Tam Tak Chi facing 14 charges, held in custody since 2020 and sentenced to 40 months today. Aside from disorderly conduct and authorised assembly, much of this focuses on just pure acts of speech. He uttered the slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our time," a phrase that is now meant to be illegal and is said to be capable of inciting others to commit secession. The prosecution also said he made baseless claims about the police and calling them damned black cops. So on this sedition colonial era charge alone, for uttering seditious words, he's looking at in prison. And we are just 18 days away from John Lee most likely taking power, where he is said to possibly enact a fake news law, regulate crowdfunding, and build a new local security law, or enact Article 23 rather, on top of the national security law. So concerning times for free speech and press freedom. The sedition legislation criminalizes violence, disaffection and other offences against the Crown. That was replaced with the government after the handover, whereas the controversial security law outlaws subversion, secession, inclusion with foreign forces. But as I say, they are being used the same, perhaps because it is easier to get a conviction through the sedition route, but it might be unified with Article 23 as we see more local security law legislation come through.
A UK judge has formally approved an extradition order for Wikileaks founder Julian Assange. It means the decision to extradite him to the US now rests with the British Home Secretary Priti Patel. Assange is wanted in the US on spying charges after he published thousands of classified documents. If Patel signs off on the extradition, his lawyers can still appeal the move. Tension remains high at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound after the incursion of Jewish ultranationalist groups into the occupied site. Israeli forces have stopped some young Muslims from leaving the compound. Earlier, Israeli troops fired rubber bullets at one of the mosque's windows after someone threw a stone at a soldier. Since Friday, a number of Palestinians have been injured in Israeli raids on the mosque compound. Harry Fawcett is in occupied East Jerusalem with the latest.
it's been calmer relatively than what we saw over the weekend, for example, but it still remains the case that the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound saw Israeli forces on it in large number earlier on this morning. They cleared the compound, they restricted entry to it by young Muslim men, and they sealed the doors again of the mosque itself with worshippers inside, all to provide the circumstances in which they could bring in these Jewish, many of them politically motivated, often far right, often settlers, and we have seen people chanting anti-Arab slogans. That's the kind of thing that is extremely provocative as far as Palestinians are concerned. And what we saw were stones throwing out from inside the mosque, as well as that, at least one Molotov cocktail and another burning object was thrown from an open window. Police firing rubber bullets, 2 injuries, one in the hand and one in the back of the head, we're told by Palestinian sources.
The head of Yemen's newly formed Presidential Council, Rashid al-Alimi, has been sworn in. The ceremony took place on Tuesday in the southern port city of Aden in front of members of parliament. Alimi has promised to stabilise the economy and ease humanitarian suffering. Earlier this month, President Abdurabu Mansour Hadi fired his deputy and formed a leadership council after a 2-month ceasefire with the Houthis, who've rejected the new council. Government officials from across the Americas are gathering in Panama to discuss ways to deal with migration across the region. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken signed a deal with Panama. It's aimed at better managing migrant flows and creating more legal pathways for people to enter the United States. Blinken said that everyone in the region will have to work together to meet the challenge.
No one country can meet these challenges or solve them alone. The United States is committed to working in partnership with all of you across every dimension of this issue, from taking on migrant smuggling networks, to improving humane and effective border management, to countering misinformation, to developing legal pathways for immigrants and refugees seeking a safe place to call home.
Al Jazeera's Teresa Bo can tell us more. She's in Buenos Aires. So what can you tell us then about this deal signed by the US and Panama? Is it going to be able to solve the problem?
Well, the deal between the United States and Panama is just the beginning of what is this meeting all about. Since last year, Panama has been demanding a regional meeting for leaders from this part of the world to address what's been a major issue. So since last year, again, Panama has been alerting about a surge of people crossing through Panama and trying to make it to the United States, trying to cross through what is known as the Darien Gap. This is a very dangerous jungle area that connects Colombia with Panama. It is estimated that around 130,000 people coming from Cuba, Haiti, Honduras, and other parts of the world are trying to make it to North America, crossing this stretch. And this poses a major challenge, not only for Panama, but also for governments in the region. In this meeting that's happening in Panama with 20 other foreign ministers, they're also going to meet, for example, regional banks, the United Nations, NGOs, and trying to tackle these humanitarian problems that, in a way, it's affecting the lives of thousands of people because of the dangers they face while they are making it to the United States. For the U.S., however, this is a major diplomatic move. It's only the Secretary of State is currently in Panama, the Secretary of Homeland Security. This is happening just weeks before the United States ends what is known as Title 42, something that has allowed the U.S. to expel thousands of migrants that have entered the U.S. During the pandemic. It's also happening as the U.S. is getting to meet with Cuban officials in Washington to try to cope with the amount of Cubans that are trying to make it to the United States. However, all of this that is happening is considered to be a preview of what is going to be a larger summit, the Summit of the Americas, expected to happen in June in the city of Los Angeles, where heads of state are going to be present and where migration is going to be a major issue.
We heard, Teresa, a lot about this problem, towards the end of last year. Just how bad is it? Has it got any better?
Well, according to the United Nations Humanitarian Agency, of the around 80 million people that have been displaced across the world, 1/5 are located here in Latin America and trying to move and trying to cross borders. I was at the Darien Gap last year, and I can tell you that what we saw is a dramatic situation. Thousands and thousands of people carrying their families, trying to cross this dangerous area that's known as the Darien Gap, where they face criminal organizations, where women are being raped, where children are dying. And that's why it is important to try to find a solution to this issue. Human rights groups are saying that a big problem are the United States security and deterrence policies at the border. This is something that forces migrants to try to find alternative routes, dangerous alternative routes. And that's why they're pushing for the U.S. to change many of the policies that are currently in place that are forcing millions of people to try to find dangerous paths to make it to North America.
Al Jazeera's Teresa Bo reporting live there from Buenos Aires. Teresa, many thanks indeed. Protests against rising prices in Peru have stranded hundreds of foreigners near Cuzco in the Peruvian Andes. Unions called a strike there on Monday, with protesters blocking roads and shutting down public transport. They're demanding that the government do more to lower water, electricity and fuel prices. Mexico is experiencing heat wave conditions right now, with temperatures as high as 38 degrees Celsius in some areas. Staff at this zoo in the southern city of Mérida have been trying to keep the animals cool with specially made frozen treats. Dozens of states have issued heat and fire warnings over the past 3 weeks. The U.S. Justice Department says that it will challenge a court ruling that struck down a mask mandate for the transport sector. But the White House is advising people to keep wearing masks on planes and other public transport. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had earlier extended the mask mandate, citing rising COVID-19 infections. The federal judge in Florida ruled the CDC overstepped its authority. The war in Ukraine is being partly blamed for the first decrease in subscribers in 10 years for Netflix. Its share value has plunged by more than 30%. The streaming service lost 200,000 subscribers worldwide between January and March. That's fueled by the loss of 700,000 accounts after the company pulled out of Russia. Netflix has also blamed increased competition and password sharing. India is using cow dung to power rural industries and homes in order to lower its reliance on fossil fuels. The move could also give poor farmers a new source of income. Rural households burn cattle droppings to heat stoves. In the past, the government has tried to phase out the practice by subsidizing natural gas. Still to come here on the News Hour, Gemma here with the sport, including how Inter Milan stayed on course for the Italian League and Cup double. Hello again, time for sport. Here's Gemma.
Thank you, Adrian. Russian and Belarusian players have been banned from competing at this year's Wimbledon Championships because of the invasion of Ukraine. The All England club announced the move after consultation with the British government. Players from those countries are still able to play on the tennis world tours, including at the French Open next month. Men's world number 2, Daniil Medvedev, and women's world number 4, Arina Zabalenka, are the highest ranked players to be affected. The Kremlin criticised the ban, saying it's unacceptable to make the athletes once again hostages of certain political prejudice, intrigues and hostile actions towards our country. The tournament organisers said it was their responsibility to limit Russia's global influence through the strongest means possible, and the decision had been made with deep regret. Tennis journalist John Worthheim believes Wimbledon is taking a powerful stand, but also setting a dangerous precedent.
You're pinning the axe of one autocrat on athletes from that country. And apart from just the patent unfairness, I mean, we don't know how these athletes feel. A lot of them don't even reside in Russia and Belarus. I just think this sets an awfully dangerous precedent going forward. We can all think of all sorts of examples where governments don't behave well. And if we are going to now be able to sanction athletes, we have just entered a totally different sports world. I had asked the question, if Maria Sharapova, who is Russian and a former champion, if she were not retired, would they reach this conclusion? What about this? Not only if this were a star, but what about if this were, if this were the American government, or if this were a different kind of government? Would they be so quick to ask? And again, I mean, these are the questions that people are going to ask quite reasonably. And we have, we've just set a heck of a precedent, because this is not going to end with this year's tournament. What impact does this really have on Russia? I mean, does Putin really care what the Wimbledon draw looks like? Is this really deploying soft power? Is this really going to inflame the Russian citizenry to oppose Putin? Or does this only cement this idea that somehow the West is persecuting Russia? But I think one of my other issues with this whole decision is that I'm just not sure it has the intended effect. And I wonder if this in some ways doesn't bolster Putin and this war that so many of us are opposed to.
Manchester United's interim boss has described their 4-0 thrashing by Liverpool as humiliating and says they're 6 years behind their old rivals. Liverpool dominated the game at Anfield and went ahead just 5 minutes in through Luis Diaz. It was 2-0 after 22 minutes. A lovely passing move here, finished off by Mohamed Salah, who ended his 8-match goalless run. Not pleasant viewing for United's legendary former manager Alex Ferguson, and he wouldn't have enjoyed the second half match either, as Sadio Mane got a third for Liverpool. But they weren't finished there, as Manchester City can regain top spot with a win over Brighton later on Wednesday.
It's really something for the supporters. If they want to celebrate 9-0, they can do that, but it's not for me.
The number he wears for United, supporters held a minute's applause in tribute. The president of Spanish football has hit back at criticism of commission payments in the deal to move the Spanish Super Cup to Saudi Arabia. Hackers unmasked audio files of Luis Rubiales, which claimed Barcelona player Gerard Piqué was given nearly $26 million for his role in the negotiations.
What they've done is so serious. It's a very serious felony. I feel my rights have been violated and I feel outraged. European.
Italia. The Argentine striker scored twice for Inter. They trail AC Milan by 2 points in the Serie A title race, but do have a game in hand. Kyrie Irving has been fined $50,000 by the NBA for making obscene gestures on court and swearing at fans. The incidents came in the Brooklyn Nets' playoff defeat in Boston on Sunday. Irving was booed by the Celtics crowd, a team he left 3 years ago. In Tuesday night's playoff games, the New Orleans Pelicans leveled up their series with the top-seeded Phoenix Suns. Brandon Ingram starred for the Pelicans with 37 points in the 125-114 win. The Suns are also sweating on the fitness of all-star guard Devin Booker, who left the game with a hamstring injury.
We continue to get better every single day with really being positive every single day and helping guys and teaching guys every single day. I just feel like it's our time. It's our time to continue to get better for this organization.
Lead in their series with the Atlanta Hawks. Jimmy Hawks have home advantage for Game 3 on Friday. And the Memphis Grizzlies have leveled up their series with Minnesota Timberwolves. Ja Morant, the star man for the Grizzlies, with 20. And that's all your sport for now. Sana will have more later. Adrian.
Gemma, many thanks indeed. Is that the time? Another news hour draws to a close, but of course the news continues. I'll be back with the day's top stories in just a moment.
The impact is you don't belong here. There's only so much of you can take before you say, okay, that's me.
An intimate look at life in Cuba today. My Cuba on Al Jazeera.
Rivers are drying out, grazing land is shrinking, and some routes long used by wildlife for migration have been blocked by human settlements. To deal with all this, Kenya needs more money for conservation, and with the coronavirus pandemic keeping many visitors away, revenue from tourism isn't enough. Here at the Amboseli National Park, an annual ceremony has been launched where corporations and individuals pay $5,000 to name an elephant. The aim this year is to raise $1 million, much of it for conservation initiatives.
Ukraine's president says that his country doesn't have enough arms to liberate Mariupol, calling on Western powers to ramp up their supply of military aid. Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up, Russia tests a new intercontinental ballistic missile called Sarmat that President Putin says is peerless and will enhance the combat capabilities of his armed forces. City officials in India's capital tear down shops and properties they say were built illegally after a wave of communal violence during a recent Hindu festival. And the search is on for hundreds of Rohingya refugees who've broken out of a detention facility in Malaysia. A Russian-imposed ultimatum for troops in the besieged port city of Mariupol to surrender has come and gone. Moscow had demanded that Ukrainian forces inside the Azovstal steel plant give up their arms, but they're still refusing to leave. And in the last hour, Ukraine's president has said that forces defending Mariupol need more weapons.
In order to unblock Mariupol, there are two ways. Serious heavy weapons that we are counting on. So far, we don't have enough of these weapons. The second way is diplomatic. So far, Russia does not agree to this. Whatever public signals they make, that they are open, that they'll make exchanges, they continue to play their own games.
Russia's defense ministry says that it hit more than 1,000 targets across the country overnight as part of its renewed operation in eastern Ukraine. But the Ukrainian military says that its troops are fighting back.
Over the past 24 hours in the territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, 10 attacks by Russian invaders were repelled, 12 tanks, 28 armored vehicles, 2 vehicles and 1 artillery system were destroyed.
And Western powers are sending new shipments of heavy weaponry to help Ukraine defend the east. Our correspondent Charles Stratford has managed to get close to what's being called the line of contact, where both sides are exchanging fire. Here's his report from Kostian Tinivka in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region.
Certainly around this area has seen some of the heaviest fighting in the last 48 hours or so. That was up until this morning, certainly around here. We've heard sporadic shelling in this area. We've been to a village, basically the closest village you can get to the front line. The Ukrainian military advising heavily on us not going any further. We've met a woman in that village. I suppose you could really describe it more of a hamlet, 4 or 5 houses. A shell had landed very close to her home. Basically thousands of other people that have left this area, and it's often the same response that you get from people still here, which is literally, I have nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, we understand that there has been shelling in various different places along the front line. We can hear stuff going on both to our east and west, the rumbling of what sound like possibly airstrikes, possibly heavy artillery. We cannot confirm either side whether it's incoming or outgoing. And interestingly, there is this sense of a renewed confidence, if you like, in the Ukrainian military, amongst the Ukrainian officials, who are saying that there has been what they describe as an offensive to try, or at least success in repelling Russia's moves, the Russian forces' moves on a number of different areas.
So Western powers sending more arms shipments to Ukraine. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, in Washington. Kimberly, tell us more about the US plans for more military assistance to Ukraine.
Well, the State Department has confirmed that the United States is weighing another package of military assistance to Ukraine. This is in addition to the $800 million that has already been given to Ukraine in recent weeks. What we know is that this package will be similar to the last one, but in terms of what it will look like specifically, those details still not available. And in terms of when this could be announced, that is also unclear. But in terms of the last package, we know that it included radar systems, coastal defense, unmanned systems, as well as small arms and ammunition, and all coming on the heels of a meeting between the U.S. president by video conference and Western allies that took place about 24 hours ago. This has been an ongoing consultation that the U.S. president has had since Russia invaded Ukraine. And we also, as around European capitals, about the concern that Ukraine is running dangerously low on ammunition. This is something that has been asked of the White House press secretary as well as the Pentagon spokesperson. And so we now can confirm that the State Department is saying that there is under consideration another package of military assistance. We know that the U.S. secretary meeting with the Polish defense minister, so we suspect that all of this is being discussed imminently.
Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett there live.
To other partners, even if it's sometimes don't have anything available at short notice that we can.
There for us. What more has
been sending lighter, more defensive weapons themselves? The Ukrainian ambassador said that the tanks from Germany, Leopard 1 tanks, have been mentioned. An arms supplier, they have said they can prepare them. It takes a few weeks to be sent to Ukraine, but also the military has them as well to use them because it needs some specific knowledge. So at the moment, the government says no. It has led to criticism, not only from the Ukrainian ambassador in Europe, should do more to help Ukraine, and it's getting more and more isolated at the moment.
Al Jazeera's Step Vassen, live in Berlin. Step, many thanks. EU Council President Charles Michel says that Russia must be held accountable for war crimes. He's currently in Kyiv, where he's been holding talks with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky.
These are atrocities. These are war crimes. It must be punished. It will be punished. They must pay values for the freedom, for the democracy.
Called the Sarmat. President Vladimir Putin said can carry up to 12 nuclear warheads and hit any target on Earth. More now from Al Jazeera's Dorsa Jabari in Moscow.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin has since congratulated the defense minister, and he has said that Sarmat, Vladimir Putin also said that it will make those nuclear capable.
The UN says that more than 5 million, more than half of the refugees have ended up in neighbouring Poland, where the government has given them access to healthcare and education. The fighting has led to Europe's biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War.
We cry. We all have the feeling that we've no home. We've no idea where to go, what to do, where to run. It's very scary. We wanted to go immediately because all the houses around were destroyed. We sat in the cellars, afraid to go out. Everything was plundered. People wanted to eat. We also had no water.
We'll get a weather update next here on Al Jazeera. Then, Israeli troops fire rubber bullets inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. We'll have the latest on rising tensions at the occupied holy site.
The journey has begun. The FIFA World Cup.
Here, that's going to just ease down across northern areas of China, pushing towards the far east of Russia. But there's that wetter weather coming in across Kyushu for Thursday. Big downpours, 3 degrees Celsius, but some very wet and windy weather, gale force winds there into Hokkaido for a time as we make our way through the remainder of the week. Heavy showers, meanwhile, will continue across central and southern parts of China, sinking a little further southwards as we go through the next day or so. Pushing further south, we've got plenty of showers there across Southeast Asia. Indochina seeing some lively showers, Cambodia, Laos seeing some wet weather, Thailand looking a little unsettled as well, and the usual rash of showers across Malaysia, and still staying unusually wet across a good part of Indonesia, northeast, and Bangladesh, hot for northwest India.
Qatar Airways, official airline of the journey.
From the Al Jazeera London Broadcast Centre, 2 people, unprompted, uninterrupted.
We're witnessing a much more humane response to what's happened to the Ukrainians than what has been meted out to these non-European refugees.
Part 1 of Abdul Razak Gurna and Nana Operiata A.
If somebody comes to Ghana from Europe, they're never called an immigrant, even if they go through exactly the same processes that we go through to come here. They're always known as an expat.
Studio B Unscripted on Al Jazeera.
Hello again, this is Al Jazeera. Let's remind you of the main news this hour. For the 3rd time, a Russian deadline for Ukrainian soldiers to surrender in the besieged port city of Mariupol has passed. The last of Kyiv's fighters there are holed up in a vast steel plant and say they won't lay down their arms. Ukraine's president says that 1,000 civilians are also sheltering in the facility. Western powers are sending new shipments of heavy weaponry to help Ukraine defend the east. Artillery systems and helicopters are part of the latest package being sent by the US. Russia says that it's successfully tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile called the Sarmat. President Vladimir Putin says that it will provide food for thought for those who threaten Russia. While the fighting is concentrated on the eastern and southern front lines, the full toll of the war in other regions of Ukraine is still unknown. Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdul Hamid is in Borodyanka, a town near Kiev that's been reduced to rubble.
Well, the situation is just as you can see behind me. I mean, it's actually difficult to describe the amount of destruction that you see in this village. Borodyanka is not bigger than a village. These are private homes. Actually, earlier, the owner of this home, an old lady called Valentina, was here trying to salvage anything she could from the wreckage, and I asked her, what did you get out of it? And she just showed me a few pillows that she had put in the car. Now, she told me she spent the whole war, so until the 29th of March, thing charred. I don't think anyone can come and live here. Maybe those buildings will have to be torn down and brought up again. Now, driving here, it was about a 2-hour drive from Kiev. What you do see is pockets of exactly that same scene. Civilian targets, houses, lives of people completely destroyed, and there's no way they could come back and live in this village, at least for the foreseeable future. And as I said, you see that in village after village, all the way from here to Kiev, just to give you an idea of what happened here. And when you look at this, you can imagine what's going to happen in the Donbass. You can imagine what's unfolding at the moment in Mariupol, where the fight is even much more virulent than what has happened here.
Now to other news. In New Delhi, city officials used bulldozers to raze shops, stalls and properties that they say are illegal. Their actions continued despite India's top court ordering a halt to the eviction drive. It happened in the Jahangirpuri neighborhood, where most of the residents are Muslim. 4 days ago, there were violent confrontations in the area between largely Hindu and Muslim crowds during a religious procession.
It's a conspiracy against Muslims, so Muslims don't live in this area. But why can't Muslims stay here? Are Muslims terrorists?
This was my shop. They were rioting there and did other things, but it's us, the shop owners, who are getting crushed.
For so many years, nothing happened. For so many years, did the government or anyone else not know if there could be fighting between Hindu and Muslims? Did they only realize it after stones were thrown during the religious procession? They are just troubling the common man.
More now from Al Jazeera's Elizabeth Puranam in New Delhi.
The demolitions in the neighbourhood of Jahangirpuri in northwest Delhi have now stopped, but it took the North Delhi Municipal Corporation, which was carrying them out, more than 2 hours after the Supreme Court asked them to stop bulldozing structures to do so. Now, the bulldozers were sent in at 10 o'clock in the morning. They were accompanied by hundreds of police and paramilitary forces, and they worked for 3 hours, destroying many dozens of properties, mostly shop drive, to remove illegal structures. But it did take place just 4 days after the violence between Hindus and Muslims in this predominant neighbourhood. Is violence. Now, 24 people have been arrested so far. Most of them have been Muslim, and our team spoke to people in Jahangir whose structures were destroyed.
For the Bharatiya Janata Party, it is being viewed as a means to try and polarize. Last Wednesday, clashes took place between members of the two communities, tension and encroachments. If that indeed was the case, then half of Delhi
has not dampened the enthusiasm of these protesters. They say it will only serve to make them more determined in that.
All of these people here come from different backgrounds, and in the parliament today there was pitched battles between the government and the opposition, who traded blame about the death of that protester. But at the end of the day, what people say is that corruption needs to be stopped, that the money that's being stolen is the money of the poor people. And they say until such time that there is a change of the system, this protest and this campaign is going to continue.
More than 62% of the presidential voter will have led East Timor. He was president. 500 Rohingya refugees